Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. It's another Red Pill Religion podcast, where Red Pill Religion, where amongst the things we say are that belief in the supernatural and the transcendent is normal, healthy, rational, and evidence-based. If you like the kind of content we do here, please support our work on redpillreligion.com. Redpillreligion.com, we're in the days of social media censorship. This is the most reliable place to find us. We've been chased off of 3 channels so far, and we're looking at other platforms to get on. If we ever disappear here from YouTube, please find us there. Here on redpillreligion.com, where we will always be. Please, if you like the kind of work we do too, we could use your support. We especially appreciate recurring or one-time PayPal and Bitcoin donations. You'll find those over here on the redpillreligion.com site. We're also available on Patreon, Subscribestar, and are looking for others. Also, we have merchandise you can buy. Also there on the right-hand side of the redpillreligion.com site. We got good reviews so far on our t-shirts and mugs, so do check us out there. Now, this morning, I am pleased that an old friend, Christopher from Missing the Mark, is here with me. Today, say hi to everybody, Christopher.
Hello.
And Christopher's agreed to be a little bit of a guinea pig for me, because we were talking, and you mentioned, friend, you have, we're not going to call them out by name, but you have, let's say, friends who are basically science fiction computer nerds who are atheist and hard to get out of it, right?
Yes, several.
It's a very common thing. As a former atheist myself, I genuinely believe most atheists engulfed in nerd science fiction and computer culture have been completely indoctrinated themselves in atheism. I know that happened to me and others.
Let me just throw out one thing. I had a conversation with Mr. John C. Wright. I know you speak to him quite frequently about that very subject with regard to Heinlein and sexual morality. It's exactly as you say. It's a attempt to push a sort of view that does not work, but because it's all pretend within science fiction, you can pretend it works. Just like Star Trek, and they have no reason to do anything that they do, but everyone's got this feeling of duty for no reason whatsoever. But they're all actors, actually, so they can all pretend to have a feeling of duty, and it works out on screen.
Yes, in fact, you will find that within Star Trek, especially the later you go in the series, Gene Roddenberry definitely, and this is one of the things that hit nerd culture, Gene Roddenberry was definitely more or less an atheistic, anti-religion kind of guy. He wasn't, a huge angry atheist or whatever. And in the original Star Trek show, you saw spiritual themes appear occasionally, somewhat over his preferences, because that's what 1960s audiences were like. Then you go into Next Generation and later, while you did have religion somewhat portrayed sympathetically in like Deep Space Nine, basically the whole Star Trek franchise rests on an ideological atheist position. So does a lot of the most famous science fiction. Robert Heinlein, who you just mentioned, one of the great science fiction masters, was not an atheist, was definitely hostile to religion and monotheism. Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, a lot of these, they're all materialist thinkers in some sense. Well, not Heinlein, but most of the great science fiction writers, with the exception of the Star Wars franchise, which has what you could call spiritual elements. Most science fiction runs on a materialist, atheist, naturalist set of presumptions, and it kind of pervades the entire field. It's rarely out there in your face, but it's just these materialist assumptions that come out of people's mouths. This is one of the reasons nerd types get into atheism, and they'll stick with that nonsense line that it's just lack of belief, but most of them know that's not true. Once you start looking at the science of atheism, however, it starts to cause them cognitive dissonance. I want to make a point here, and we're going to be talking about what I would call scientific or even psychological proofs of God. But I'm going to start with this. It is absolutely the case that science is a less useful way of providing evidence for God. While ideological atheists will have taught us that there is no evidence of God, that is an obvious lie, or there is no proof. What I would actually call the solidest proofs are the ones that have never been, debunked, never been fallen apart, taken apart. Edward Feser has a good modern updated version of 5 proofs of God. These are pure logical observational proofs that anybody can do at any time and don't need anything. And I would argue that these classical proofs, these are only 5, but as you know, Christopher, there's more than 5, but these are rock solid and have never been debunked by anybody. So I would tell anybody listening, if you want the, the stuff that's not refutable, you look at stuff like this.
Yeah, something I should just add in is because it's a good book. I'm only partway through it actually, but a good thing just to explain is that the evidence that for God is literally everything in creation. I mean, look, it's literally in front of your nose. It literally is your nose. Both of those are evidence for God. What the arguments do is show you how all these things that are evidence for God. Because evidence does not interpret itself. You have to have a rational mind that can grasp the significance of the evidence in order to understand how it is evidence. So everything is evidence. And this is why it is so accessible, because no matter where you are, if you exist, you are evidence for God. And so so the evidence is literally everywhere. It's literally everything. And these the 5 arguments are essentially explaining how it is so that you can understand how it is evidence.
Yes, although I will mention that that these are not. Being a trained philosopher, you probably try to use words properly, but in fact, I prefer to call them proofs, which is perfectly valid thing to call them, because they like to weasel a word and say there is no proof. And I've even heard this one: arguments are not evidence.
Well,
now,
yeah,
that's a ridiculous thought-terminating cliche. These are proofs, and if you want to talk about them, the proof. This is 5 different proofs. Each of one, all by itself, is sufficient to prove that there is a God. If you want to prove that you're interested in the question and are taking it seriously, please make yourself understand one of these proofs well enough that you can explain it to somebody else. Then go ahead and try to debunk it if you can. I don't think you can.
They can, but the only way you can do it is by rejecting reason, which is what they all do. I mean, everyone who actually seriously deals with one of these proofs just ends up by saying that human reason isn't actually reliable to reach a conclusion. And it's a universal defeater for all proof. So, of course, it defeats any particular proof they want to defeat. Then they just ignore what they just said and pretend that they're rational. That's a story for another day. We're here because actually you'd mentioned some things. I'm getting us off the track, so let me get us back on the track. You had mentioned some stuff about scientific investigations of some things like evidence for afterlife and so on. And this is a subject I never looked into.
Okay.
And so I had asked you about it, and then you said, "Here, let's do it here. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone." So.
Let's talk about
you
that.
introduced the topic properly, but I just want to, since I was derailing us, get us back on.
Sure. Let's talk about some science that if atheists see, modern atheism, is my contention, is very much a cult religious movement, and one you are indoctrinated into through mass media, especially if you're in nerd culture. You will be indoctrinated into it in university, and you will be indoctrinated into it in multiple places, including the science classroom, where you will be taught the scientific naturalist ideology, the scientific naturalist, the methodological naturalist philosophy of science, as if it is science, and it is not. But a lot of them have been indoctrinated to immediately think science is how you prove things. The only way we know anything is true is through science. You know that's wrong. I know that's wrong. They've been taught to believe it, so they believe the only thing that's true, possible to know is true, is through science.
It's literally laughably wrong.
I know it's laughably wrong, but they always say it.
Anyway,
they always believe it. You have to go with their indoctrinated presuppositions. They think the only way we know anything is true is science. Therefore, let's talk about some science that goes against them. We're going to talk about specific science that points to God and an afterlife, and then if we have time, we're also going to spend some time looking at the science that looks at the psychology of atheism and why people are atheist, because it is not a rational position, or at least it is only one possible rational position. Why do they choose this position, even if you call it rational? But let's talk about scientific proofs first. A book that I strongly recommend as a starter, I can tell you about it, and I will tell you about it, is called Evidence of the Afterlife, the Science of Near-Death Experiences. Now, let me get a few things out about this at once. First off, a lot of people dismiss near-death experience books because there's hundreds of them, and some are more solid than others. Some are more dubious than others. Some of them are just, individual anecdotal reports, or, This, on the other hand, the work of Dr. Jeffrey Long, who has been doing this since, I believe, at least the 1990s. We're talking about a decades-long medical tracking survey of near-death experiences. This book came out in 2011. However, you know, just in the last few years, all the data has been updated. It is all peer-reviewed and published and available online through ndurf.org. You can talk to the researchers yourself and ask them questions, and this is fully peer-reviewed data. The evidence of this book summarizes the data extensively. Essentially, what Dr. Long and his crew have done is started taking medically verifiable near-death experience. Now, how do they say medically verifiable? Essentially, the short answer is you have to be verified as literally brain dead. Now, important note here: the word brain death has become very slippery and used for very dodgy, questionable purposes to describe somebody who's in a coma, who they'll say can't live, but really can. No. To get in here, you have to get classic old school brain death, which means you flatlined. You flatlined. Your heart won't keep going unless they have a machine literally forcing the heart to keep going. The lungs will not work unless a machine is making the lungs keep going. There is zero brain activity. You must be brain dead, and you must be able to bring the proof that you were so brain dead before you get in here, which means we can throw aside any experiences or any reports that can't meet this standard. Over the decade, Dr. Long has gathered literally thousands of them, thousands upon thousands of them, and then interviewed these patients extensively using what's called a medical tracking survey. Medical tracking surveys are used in medical science, in peer review all the time, to study drug interventions, drug trials, psychological interventions, and even the result of surgeries. Therefore, by any rational standard, this qualifies as science, indeed as medical science. You cannot say it is not science, unless you are using some arbitrary definition, which would basically mean the entire fields of psychology and sociology and most of surgery and quite a lot of medical science simply isn't science. You have to grant that this is science. It is not refutable that it is science. Now, the results are another interesting question, but to say again, the medical tracking survey is one of those where they will ask you a bunch of questions. It'll be a long survey. It'll be a standardized survey. They will ask the same questions over and over again to try to trip you up to see if you're lying or if you're delusional, if you are, if you're just making stuff up, whatever it is, how consistent can we get you? Furthermore, because it has been running for decades and is still running live, they go back and periodically re-interview the patients, run them through the whole set of questions again after a few years, maybe different variations on the same questions, and see what do they find. And in tabulating these results, which you can go see for yourself, what comes out very starkly is that it is impossible medically and scientifically to reasonably suggest that these are dreams, that they are wishful thinking, that they are delusion. You cannot make a scientific case for any one of those. Those are all excluded. So whatever they are something unique that happens after a person has flatlined and they have no brain activity, including no heart or lung going on. They are dead by any rational standard. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. Within that, one of the things that we can say, first off, the third most common experience of people who've died on the table like that is that they have what's called the white light in the tunnel that you see on all the debunker stuff talking about near-death experience. They act like the white light in the tunnel that we've all heard about is what most people get. And the debunkers like going after that white light in a tunnel because it's easy to try to write that off as euphoria, hypoxia, something like that. However, that's only the third most common report. Only in about 20 to 25% of cases did they even see the light in the tunnel. The second most common, at over a third, the second most common is meeting people you know to be dead. I do not mean people you think are dead or whatever, but people you can verify are dead. That's the second most common experience at over a third. And that you can verify are dead. And you come back out and say, I talked to my mom, I talked to my sister, I talked to Some guy we've seen this one. I've talked to a guy who's in the hospital 3 floors down from me right now. They'll come out and say something like that. And there's a dead guy down there 3 floors down that they just met. Encounters like that. Those are the most common. And again, they tend to be extremely specific. The #1 report by far at almost 50% is meeting a being of infinite light and love that they all universally perceive as God, whether they were atheist, Jewish, Christian, or anything else before then. That is the #1 report, meeting a being of infinite light and love that they instantly perceive as love. In fact, what is most common among them is that even if they do experience it or see it as a person of human form of various types, they are immediately aware that it is a projection being shown to them for something that they can understand, that it's not really, that it's really just a representation of something much bigger and greater on the other side. That's the #1 report of people who do this, who die on the table like this. Now, you can find ways to get skeptical of this data. In fact, this data goes against certain Christian concepts of salvation. However, because it does tend to imply that atheists, Jews, and people of no particular religion may get to go to heaven, may get to meet God, that's not a scientific question. That's a theological and philosophical question. We might look at it in any of different ways, but what is significant here is how rigorous the data set is, how well they've asked the question. And one final thing I will add about it too is because they stay with these people when they can and go back to them years later and do follow-up surveys. And one of the more interesting things that they have found, and this will be the end of what I say about this data, but it's something you can challenge your atheist friends on. Again, they've ruled out the common ones: rush of endorphins, chemicals, snafu, dreams, delusions. And in fact, ruling it out, one of the many pieces of data that rules it out as dreams and delusions is, here's one of the weirdest things about the data, or about the subjects. They remember the event surrounding their near-death experience pretty much better than anything else in their lives. You go back to them 10 years later, 20 years later, over 90% of them remain rock solid convinced that it happened. I mean, doubt and rethinking is very rare. They can remember it with greater detail than they can remember things like the day they got married, or the day that somebody they loved died, or the day that their child was born. They remember it with greater detail and clarity, certainty and conviction and consistency than real live events. All of this points to these things being scientifically real. How you interpret them philosophically or theologically is your own business. I mentioned this, and then I'm going to change the subject, but I'm going to refer to an interview with Skeptico. Skeptico is a skeptic site that gets skeptical of skeptics. I love them. And this is an in-depth interview with this researcher who answers every common objection and every common question. Here he is, the horse's mouth, you can get it. He even talks about how ideological atheists literally have been shown to lie about the data that he has presented, literally misrepresents what's in the peer-reviewed studies that have been reviewed by independent researchers, misrepresents it, and even shows how, and Skeptico, the guy doing the interview, talks about this too. What has been found is that there have been a number of atheists, skeptics, naturalists, whatever you call it, that have gone on speaking tours and written books and articles claiming to have debunked near-death experiences. And one of the things they show here and discuss here is that they all misrepresent it, they all lie about it, and it's shocking. And in fact, a majority of the experts who so-called experts of the so-called experts who've interviewed or looked at the near-death experience and claimed, you know, skeptically, this is nothing or this is whatever, none of them have interviewed a single near-death experience patient. So they have not reviewed the peer-reviewed data, and they have not talked to the patients, and they've written entire books claiming that there's nothing to near-death experiences. That's disturbing, and that's ideological. And
sounds typical, though.
Well, that's what's disturbing.
I mean, that's typical of the general approach on pretty much any subject.
Well, it is what's typical of ideological atheists who've been indoctrinated. There is no question that this is science and that it's been misrepresented. Now, you as a Christian or a Catholic or whatever may go look at it and say, well, there's certain kinds of problems here, and that's your business. What you cannot do is say that this is not science, and what you cannot do is say is that it is not evidence, and you can't wave it away as wishful thinking, delusion, schizophrenia, or whatever. It doesn't match that pattern. Medically, the most reliable thing to think is what's going on here is that they are real and that your body is not inside your brain. I'm sorry, your mind is not your brain. Your brain is not your mind. And adding to that, and this will be a little bit of a change of subject, but let's get through it. I'm going to recommend a series of videos by Inspiring Philosophy, who really does his homework. The Case for the Soul. This is all, if you go to this 4-part series called The Case for the Soul, this is all looking at contemporary science with peer-reviewed references all up the butt that you can check all over yourself, showing that he is not misrepresenting the science in any way. You can take issue with any of his conclusions that you want. But it's definitely science and it's definitely evidence. You cannot call it not science and not evidence. And in Mike from Inspiring Philosophy's whole series here, he goes into, first off, he talks about the near-death experience research. Not only what I've talked about, but other near-death experience research, which matches everything I've said. These cannot be gotten down to wishful thinking or delusions or dreams. They cannot be. The science is against that proposition. What he goes into further in this 4-part series is evidence we are finding now in, and you can say whatever you want about quantum physics, but in quantum physics and in neurobiology, what we are finding is evidence all over the place that your body, your brain, is like somehow interacting with something that's not there physically within the central nervous system, i.e. something non-physical is interacting with your brain. And there is evidence all over the science that that is happening, that your mind is what they call non-local. Now, you'll notice this is a 4-part series called The Case for the Soul. But it's not refutable that we've got contemporary science saying your mind cannot be gotten down to your brain and central nervous system. In fact, as Mike gets into it, the deeper you go, well, you will have heard this narrative that, you know, we're getting closer all the time to be able to explaining everything through the brain and the chemistry, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Actually, what has happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years is that the more we have learned about brain science and the more we have learned about the central nervous system, the more impossible it becomes for us to explain human awareness, human perception, and human will. The more, let me repeat that, the more we learn, the less possible it looks that you can get it down to the brain. We are further than ever, arguably, from getting past, do you know what the neural binding problem is, or the hard problem is, the cognitive binding problem?
Oh, I've heard of the hard problem, though I can't at the moment remember what it is.
There's several. The bottom line is that they have, although they can, there's several variations of how they call it, but the bottom line is we know now all over the brain where you're processing hearing, where you're processing speech, where you're processing different visual stimulus, visual audio stimulus, visual touch stimulus. We can go identify various Brodmann, they're called Brodmann regions of the brain where they do that. And there's nowhere in the entire brain to turn it all, to put it all together. There is no way to explain how, oh, I'm experiencing the color red here and the shape of an apple and the smell of an apple and the texture of an apple. This must be an apple. There is zero way to explain that. Sometimes called the cognitive binding problem or the hard problem. There's no way they can produce or explain unified perception of anything within the brain and central nervous system.
So essentially going from stimulus to idea?
Yeah, stimulus to idea. Yeah, there's no way to do it. It's going from stimulus to concept. Literally, you know, if you have a carrot in front of you, we can explain how you perceive the orange of the carrot and the shape of the carrot and the smell of the carrot, but we can't tell you where you put it all together and perceive it as a carrot. Just can't. It's not possible to do that with everything we know in contemporary science. Furthermore, and in his third part, I'll just mention, because we're just glossing these, because you can go as deep as you want on any of these. Mike goes into what's going on in quantum biology. Now, let me point out, I know some people are skeptical of quantum physics. I don't really care what your position is on science, on quantum physics. It is not relevant here what you think of quantum physics. A lot of smart, intelligent scientists today do believe in quantum physics and are producing interesting results. So if you are interested in the science and you are interested in quantum physics, you should look at this, because there's all kinds of evidence in quantum biology that your mind, your awareness is non-local, is not to be found within what we call your physical body, that your mind, your awareness, and probably, the cognitive minding stuff that I was just talking about are taking a place in a non-material place called Hilbert space. Now, again, I'm going to say you can disbelieve quantum physics if you want. Take it up with the Nobel Prize winners and the other scientists who do believe in it. Again, within quantum biology, we've got data pointing straight to the idea that you have a soul that's not in your body, that your awareness, that your sensory perceptions are coming together in something that's not physically inside your body at all, because it has no physicality. This is contemporary science. Now, these are more or less philosophical conclusions, but there's nothing wrong with these philosophical conclusions. Especially when the hypothesis that you can get it all down to physical effects is busted. You have no evidence for the idea that you can get it all down to physical. Therefore, anything suggesting, we have science suggesting your mind's not local, it's on you to prove that it's not, or that this science is invalid. This is what I would say to young atheists, or to atheists who are into the science. It's on you to prove why this is wrong.
Yeah, they actually intrinsically can't. It's a kind of funny problem that materialists face. But, so you have a lab. You test something about electrons in a lab. You can, properly speaking, say how an electron behaves in your lab. To go from that to saying this is how the electron behaves when it is operating in somebody's brain as part of an active decision is not something you can do. You can't just jump to that. And then, and this is why you see that no one has ever made an argument for why it should be the same. All you ever see is, well, why wouldn't it be the same? Which is not an argument. It's actually exactly the sort of thing that they, it's intrinsically a problem. Right, because if you actually were to try to measure like how the electron is behaving inside the brain while it's taking part in the decision-making process, you would be, by virtue of measuring it, interacting with it, and thus taking it out of the decision-making process that it would be in. So,
Correct.
So it's inherently impossible to actually prove that this is that how things work when you're measuring an electron who isn't doing anything interesting in a lab behaves, is how it behaves in all other circumstances. In particular, in ones that you can't possibly intrinsically can't look at. So that's why materialists always have. This is why they sort of came up with the burden of proof and didn't really notice that it's on them.
Yeah, they have the burden of proof here.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to say that this thing that I've observed is true of everything, you have to then make an argument for it or prove it in some fashion. And they don't. They just say, well, can you prove it's otherwise? I remember one friend saying something effective. Well, if you can show that it's not, then your Nobel Prize is waiting for you.
That's right. No, it's not actually anything. Now, we've only got about 10 minutes to go here, so I'm gonna 10, 15 minutes. But let me keep going on a couple of other things, because you're absolutely right. And I'm gonna scope out to a broader sense that atheists really need to talk about if you believe in quantum physics. And if you don't, fine. Again, you get to go take it up with the quantum physicists, not me. If you believe in quantum physics, which I know an awful lot of atheists do, the God question is immediately brought into sharp focus. I would recommend as a good starting point, which also has the peer-reviewed papers linked in the low bar and all the references you want. Mike from Inspiring Philosophy basically makes the case very well that materialism is dead and quantum physics has killed it. If, in fact, quantum physics is true, materialism, the idea that everything is a result of natural forces, is impossible, my friends. And it inherently brings us to something that is contemporary physics theory, which is the digital universe theory. Now, Christopher, as a Thomist, you may not like the digital universe theory, and you may not believe in it. Your opinion is not relevant, sir. If we are talking about contemporary science, the digital universe theory is as much contemporary science as the Big Bang theory is. It is at least as much contemporary science. In fact, a number of physicists I know will say that digital universe has more evidence behind it and is more provable than the Big Bang Theory. So this is science. If quantum physics is correct, we probably live in an idealist universe and there is no physical reality. A Thomist is going to scream and hate that idea from jump. So is any Aristotelian. That's fine. You have that argument if you want. If you believe quantum physics is true, then the most rational conclusion is that some kind of guiding ultimate intelligence is running all of physical reality. There's countless physicists, including Nobel laureates, who will tell you so. I.e., if quantum physics is true, there has to be a God or something an awful lot like it, something really unimaginably intelligent and unimaginably in control of absolutely everything. If not a God, gosh darn it, something that most people would think looked like a God. Therefore, if you believe quantum physics is true, it is now rational to think that there must be a God, at least. It is at least rational to think it, and anybody who claims it's not rational to think it has a burden of proof. You either need to debunk quantum physics, or you need to come up with a better explanation, a more parsimonious, reasonable explanation, and I submit that none of the atheists listening can. Did you want to add any comments on that, Christopher?
Oh, I just want to throw in that the quantum physics is a lot more reconcilable to Thomism. It's just than you made out. It's just that you have to grant the thing that wouldn't is holding material reality to have absolutely no existence of any kind. Holding that it is the material reality is not nearly as solid as it looks like, but is much more, for lack of a better term, spiritual. As long as you are going to grant electrons as actually real things, and not merely make believe pretend, you can reconcile that with Thomism. It's just it's a little harder and out of the scope of the conversation at the moment. Can I actually ask a question about some of the earlier stuff, the near-death experience stuff?
Sure.
You had mentioned can you grab hold quickly of the number? Is it on a table or something, of the actual number of? Are we talking like around 1,000? Are we talking close to 10,000? Like what?
How many does he have? How many does he have?
Yeah, how many subjects met that flatlining no brain activity threshold? Because when you said thousands, I was astounded.
If I am recalling correctly, it is more than 5,000. Wow. But I don't have it in front of me. I was not prepared for that question, and it would take me a few minutes, but I will get you the number after the show. I know that I am certain that it is well in excess of 4,000.
Wow.
Gathered over a period of a few decades, like I said, with follow-ups. So this is really rigorous. He's really looked at hard, and he's trying to fool the people, and he's doing everything he can to trip up the subjects and throw shade on their stories, and he can't do it. Actually, believe it or not, if you know anything about psychological interventions, it's extraordinarily rare for somebody 10 to 20 years later to be completely certain that they have remembered an event perfectly and still be able to recount it and be consistent with their 10 to 20-year-old theory. You can't do that on your own wedding day or the day your kid was born, Christopher.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it takes like 2 seconds to think back to some events. Like, how well could I testify to what actually happened? Then I'm like, not very well.
You'll remember certain details that are clear for you, but what they find, the ones who flatlined and come back, they can remember it with perfect clarity. Even in my real world experience, the few people I know who've had them match this experience too. Like I'll just say it, a really good friend of mine, a woman I know, died on the table and said she met her father and her sister, both of whom were dead, and they yelled at her and really mean to her and told her she had to go back right now, and then she was back. That's very, very, very common in the literature on these experiences.
Interesting.
And like I said, the flip side is this is a little bit of a challenge to Christian thinking. But again, it's on you to take. This is what the data is, and this is irrefutably science.
Well, it's a much bigger challenge to the Bible thumpers.
It is, yeah, it really is.
It's not that. The things so far, the things that you described are not that much of a challenge to Catholic, or an Orthodox position.
It means an atheist might go to heaven, but yeah.
Well, I mean, you can. Heck, I can I can pull out the part of the Catechism of the Catholic Church which says that such a thing is possible.
There you go. So now I'm going to change the subject to the psychology of atheism, because we've only got a few more minutes left, and I want to really get into this because it kind of matters. This is still, however, by modern definitions, all of this is science and it's relevant. Justin L. Barrett, I'm going to look at a few books here. Justin L. Barrett is a research psychologist working with other research psychologists, looking at the question of what in ancient times was known as the sensus divinatus. And there are different descriptions of it. It has been known for thousands of years and across multiple religions and multiple cultures that most humans appear to have an inborn sense that something is out there that's like aware of us and that we're aware of it, and it seems to know what's going on and maybe even be, controlling things. That is a natural inborn sense that we have known for thousands of years. Most humans have it. It's not just Christians. We've found that in African tribes, in South American tribes, in North American tribes, in culture after culture. It's a universal sense called the sensus divinatus. And Justin L. Barrett and other research psychologists went and did in-depth research on this, and where does it come from and where can we get it from, and determined that the sensus divinatus that we've heard about for thousands of years develops naturally in most children between the ages of 2 and 4, around the same time they are getting language development. They develop it in atheist households, they develop it in religious households, they just normally develop it. Almost all children report it. Even talking to these children, they will talk about it without prompting. They will answer questions about it without prompting, without any help. They can distinguish this sense from invisible friends, the tooth fairy, Santa Claus, monsters under the bed or in the closet. They can distinguish it just fine. It is normal for the children to have this sense, whether they grew up Hindu, atheist, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever, they develop the sense. What they do with it after that is another question. This immediately takes us to the question of, all right, let's say we believe in evolution. Don't have to argue about it. Don't care if somebody listening doesn't believe in evolution. Don't care what Christopher thinks of evolution. Not relevant. If you believe in evolution, we evolved this sense. And it is nearly universal in children. The exceptions, by the way, are mostly male and very likely to be autistic. I mean, they're like autistics are something like 8 to 10 times more likely than the general population to lack this sense, and boys are more likely to lack the sense than girls. This is just what the science shows about this sense, leading to the question for the ideological atheist as to why would we evolve a sense that is merely delusional. If you're going to assert that this sense is delusional, you now have a burden of proof for that. You have to prove that extraordinary claim that we evolved the sense of a delusion for no clear purpose that they can explain.
By the way, since Andrew Stratelis isn't here, let me just say the thing that he'd probably be screaming at the screen to say at the moment, which is also, if you're going to assert that it's delusional and you can prove this case, you have to conclude that this had to be useful for an evolutionary purpose if it's, here and preserved. And therefore, the burden is on you to show why you should subvert this sense in any way, given that it has clearly been demonstrated to be useful for survival and maintenance of the species.
That's right.
You either have to say, if you conclude that it is delusional, you do have to either say, essentially screw the species, or come up with some really good way of showing how this is not, no longer necessary for the survival of the species, which would entail understanding an awful lot of stuff you have precisely zero chance of fitting inside of one human head.
That's right. And we only have 5 to 10 minutes left here, so I'm going to go at a faster clip, but mention the work of another research psychologist. So, if psychology is science, this is science. The Faith of the Fatherless, the Psychology of Atheists. He first published this data, I think, back in the 90s, but he's had it updated as early as 2013. Extensive surveys of atheists and profiles of publicly known atheists, and what he has found is fascinating. I think we've had reason to believe this going back a lot further than this, but more than 90% of atheists are male, and as a separate proposition, more than 90% of self-described atheists have severe father issues. That is, they grow up in a fatherless home, a broken home, or they had an abusive father, or a neglectful bad father, a weak father, or no father at all. This is more than 90%. It's not 100, so anybody can be an exception, but it's a better than 9 out of 10 odds that if you meet an atheist, he is male and he is fatherless in some substantial way. This is the science, and this is based on surveys of atheist groups and extensive surveys of self-reported atheists, what their background is like. And furthermore, he looks through a number of cases of famous atheists like Nietzsche, Freud, you name the famous atheists, and virtually always finds they come from broken homes, had terrible fathers, no fathers, or were maybe raised in an orphanage.
Father died when they were 2 or 3.
It's virtually all of them, which, again, this is a scientific finding. You may interpret it any way you want as the listener, but, and I'll get one last thing in here because I wanted more, but I'm going to mention one last thing in here. This is a book by Dr. Rodney Stark, a Berkeley sociologist, who shows how worldwide for quite a few years now, more than a decade, the atheist population has been rapidly declining, and the religious population worldwide everywhere, both in total numbers and as a proportion of the population, has been rising. Islam is growing. Hinduism is growing, Shintoism is growing, paganism is growing, Christianity is growing, Islam is growing, Judaism is growing. There's 2 religions that one may not be growing. It's not clear what's going on with Buddhism, because a lot of them, it's hard to get numbers on them because so many of them are in China. So it's possible that Buddhism is slightly shrinking or staying static or slightly growing, but it's near its historic norms. The only one that can be definitively said to be shrinking is atheism, and atheism is shrinking in the UK, it's shrinking in Europe, it's shrinking in the United States, and one of the reasons it's shrinking is because atheists do not reproduce. The short story is non-religious women reproduce at a rate of about 1.9 children per woman, and atheist women reproduce at a rate of 1.1 per woman. They cannot replace their numbers except by recruiting, because mostly atheists don't have sex and don't reproduce. They just look at a lot of porn. Okay, that was a cheap shot. For the most part, they choose not to have kids, to be more shareable. They choose not to reproduce. Religious people, however, do. And to gloss it all, I've got links to all this. I recommend having a look at Conservapedia, which the articles on atheism are fascinating, but they are well referenced. You go to Conservapedia and look at the data, and one of the things you'll find is that, yes, atheists are less likely to reproduce. And if you look at atheism and health, atheists are
they're more likely to smoke, be alcoholics, be depressed. I mean, it's
more likely to be out-smoked. They're more likely to be alcoholic. They're more likely to be depressed. They are more likely to suicide. They're like 8 times more likely to suicide than the general population. And there's more. They're more likely to be fat or unusually skinny. They just are. And you can get into whatever you want to on this. They're also, by the way, and this is documented by Vox Day in his book, The Irrational Atheist, they are more likely to go to jail. They like to spin a tale that the Christians are the overwhelming majority in jail, which is true, but it's a game they're playing with the statistics. Those who grow up non-religious or atheist are more likely to go to jail. They're just more likely to be Christian when they get out of jail, because jailhouse conversions are extremely common. And the ones who convert while in jail are less likely to be recidivists, i.e. they're less likely to go back to jail if they find God in jail.
I think if memory serves, they're also way less likely to cause problems while they're in jail, which is one reason why prisons really happen to like jailhouse conversions, because it's the people who actually do stop attacking guards and stop attacking each other and things like that.
You will hear...
I can't cite a source for that, though. So
no, I can't find a source for that, but if you look through all that data, it's there. From this case alone, we can say that it is reasonable to conclude that atheism may be a psychological malady and a mental block. It is scientific to advance that conclusion. It is mostly a condition of fatherless males who appear to have mental and emotional health issues. And they like to say that they care about the science and they care about the evidence. All of this is science they should be confronted with and asked to answer for. And what I find that most of it comes down to is that they run away with it and will not directly address it because it's not refutable. On a scientific basis, it is rational to think there is a God and that there is an afterlife, and furthermore, that there is something weird psychologically about atheism. And that would be my presentation on science and atheism. What do you think? You got any more final questions?
No, it's interesting. I want to look. I want to read that book now on the near-death experience. I hadn't realized the near-death experience was so common.
Well,
my completely uninformed opinion, I hadn't paid any attention, was that it'd be like dozens of people over the last decades, not thousands.
Thousands, yes.
So
in fact,
that's really interesting.
I'll mention that there are far more than those thousands of reports. This is a rigorous study. You have to get past barriers to get into it. So they won't take it if you just come in and say, I had a near-death experience. I'm like, well, I need the doctor's record to show you flatline. And if you ain't got that, you're not getting in here. And yeah, thousands. This is actually why I consider this the most important data set to look at, because you can get all kinds of books of people telling their experiences, or emergency room doctors talking about a few stories that they've seen with patients or whatever it is. No, this is a decades long, put to the highest peer-reviewed standards to look at these people. And so and I've seen ideological atheists openly lie about it, which is just an instant red flag, right? So yeah, it's totally worth looking at and challenging yourself with. The book was published in, almost 10 years ago, but if you go to nderf.org, nderf.org,
Near-Death Experience Research Foundation.org.
That's right. If you go there, you can dig in and get the original data. Also, I definitely recommend, as I mentioned, this interview with Dr. Long, because Dr. Long answers every hard question you could want. Here's the actual researcher, the head of this decades-long, very rigorous study, answering the most common questions. And, he gives his medical opinion, was medically, whatever you want to say about these have to be real based on all the data we're seeing. They have to be real. Now, it is the case that not everybody who dies on the table or whatever has a near-death experience. From that, you could, for example, conclude that, well, everybody doesn't have one, so there must be something wrong with them. But the other is that maybe everybody has one and only a few people get to remember it. Or whatever else you want to say. The bottom line, here it is from the horse's mouth. I strongly recommend watching his in-depth interview, because like I said, they also go over the fact that so-called debunkers literally lie about the data. Literally lie about the data in published books and magazine articles, which is just a huge red flag for me. So, all right, well, this has been fun. And, if we want to come back and do it at another time, or if Christopher or anybody else has any further questions, obviously, you should consult these sources, right? I'm not Mr. Encyclopedia who remembers that on every page of every one of these sources. Get them yourself, but I will certainly answer any questions because I've looked at all this, okay? So also, by the way, everybody, please go over to Missing the Mark and give us a subscribe. What have you been up to on Missing the Mark lately, Christopher?
I haven't gotten a lot of sleep lately, so I'm having trouble remembering. It's talking about meaning of life recently.
I really enjoy Christopher's channel. I should have put it up. Go do subscribe to it. He talks about all kinds of, Missing the Mark is a reference to sin, by the way, but he talks about all kinds of stuff, including sometimes taking on atheists, sometimes other stuff. One of my favorite things about Christopher is he has a very dry, deadpan sense of humor. So he can be very funny, even though you don't realize he's funny. All right, everybody, this has been fun, and we got to close it out now. So do me a favor, please give us a like, please give us a subscribe, please buy some of our merchandise or drop a tip in the tip jar on redcoatreligion.com. Go subscribe to Missing the Mark, and God bless everybody.
God bless you.